Wow, what an introduction. I never get that introduction when I'm upstairs with the kids because I'm just it's kind of just like I'm teaching them and I never give myself that introduction, right? But thank you, Pastor Jeremy. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joelle. I'm the kids pastor here. If you didn't know that, if you did, that's also really cool. And I get really nervous when I talk to adults because you guys actually listen. Okay, so bear with me. Sometimes I'll talk and I'm kind of expecting someone to ask to use the bathroom. Or I'm kind of expecting someone to interrupt or to hang off my leg or something. If any of you do that, that's extremely weird. So don't do that. You heard it here first. But yeah, I get the privilege to teach to kids, and even today is just such a privilege to get to teach to you, people who are above the height of 4'10". It's awesome. It's great. And you guys also make eye contact, which is awesome too, and also kind of creepy. So I just think it's an honor to be here. I am also kind of known as Sam's wife, Pastor Sam's wife. He spoke last week, which gives me the ammo to say that he was my opening act. Okay? And one thing about Sam is he's really funny, but I would like to say I'm funnier. And so I always say I'm his ghostwriter. And so anything he says that's funny may have came from me. He just said it louder. Okay? But that has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today. I'm just rambling. But he did speak last week. So if you were here last week, he started off talking about Joseph at the end of Genesis and his story. And we wrapped up the first part of Joseph's story last week in Genesis chapter 39. And as a quick refresher, I'll keep you up to date here. At the end of that story, we find Joseph in a really difficult situation, which happens again and again for Joseph, okay? He's been entrusted with everything in Potiphar's household, who is his master at the time because he's a slave, except for Potiphar's wife, which makes total sense, right? Everything but Potiphar's wife. So she takes an interest in him for reasons unknown, okay? But Joseph consistently rejects her advances. Out of deep respect for Potiphar and a sincere love for God, he responds, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And so despite his resistance, Potiphar's wife persists day in and day out to kind of try to trap Joseph and get him in trouble. But Joseph remains steadfast. And in one final attempt, okay, she corners him when no one else is around. He panics. He's determined to escape. He runs out into the street, and he drops a garment of his clothes where they were, and he runs out. And you think, if you know the story of Joseph, which you should if you were here last week, you'd think by now he would have known that his clothes gets him in trouble, right? So I'm kind of okay, of course this happens again. He drops his clothes. Potiphar's wife then falsely accuses him, claiming that the Hebrew servant that Potiphar brought into their home tried to approach her. And according to Potiphar's wife, this is the biggest break of trust between them. And this ends in Potiphar having to send Joseph into prison. So, this is where we're going to pick up from today. That was a little recap. There was many more things that we'll talk about too, but this is where we're going to pick up today. But kind of in a weird way, this is a part two. Here we are back at the start again. Joseph's in this dark place in prison. And scripture says that it's actually described as a dungeon. And we can only assume that this section of prison that Joseph was in was a miserable place to be. I mean, prison would be miserable, but it was so miserable that this is where the prisoners of Pharaoh, the king, would be. So this is one of the worst parts of the prison. And he yet again has found himself in a pit. And I wonder if Joseph ever had some traumatic flashbacks to when his brothers years ago threw him into a pit. I wonder if he ever just kind of pictured their faces in a way too. I wonder if he ever thought to himself, how did I get here again? Have you ever been through something and then you get out of it and you kind of go through something similar again and you're like, how did this happen again? Okay? What are the odds? I wonder if Joseph ever felt forgotten by God or unseen by him. I think I would have. But what if I told you that despite the absolute dumpster fire that Joseph's situation is right now, that God hasn't actually left Joseph? And we know last week that there was purpose in his suffering, but Joseph actually experiences more things. And this is another suffering for him. But God hasn't left Joseph. And he's working behind the scenes to pull Joseph out of his misery and into a purpose greater than Joseph could ever dream for himself. Okay? So, continuing the story together of Joseph today, if you'd like to follow along, we're going to pick it up in Genesis chapter 40 with me in your Bible, okay? So if you want to scroll on your phone or open up your Bible, if you're someone who likes to follow along, then that's where we're going to start. So while Joseph is in prison, he has an encounter with a baker and a cupbearer of the king. And these men had landed themselves in prison because they committed some offenses to Pharaoh, the king, right? So, I mean, that's kind of how you end up in prison, right? Besides, well, I guess Joseph was blameless, but whatever, I'm not going to go there. By the time that this encounter happens, we're not too sure the timeline in which Joseph is thrown into prison, but then also meets these cupbearers and bakers, but there's like a little bit of time that has passed, okay? And so he actually gains favor with the prison warden, one of the head guards. He actually gains favor, which is, so Joseph is now appointed by this guy to be able to be in charge of other prisoners, which is kind of cool. He goes from being a prisoner and still a prisoner, but now he has favor, and the Lord remained on him. He was successful in this. So despite being a prisoner himself, God's faithfulness is actually still pouring out onto Joseph. He's still taking care of him. And in all the things that he did with this position that he held, God gave him success. But both of these officials, the cupbearer and the baker, enter into prison, and they're put under Joseph's leadership. And he notices that they're in trouble. And this isn't by coincidence at all that they are underneath his leadership. So Genesis 44-8 reads, and it'll be on the screen, so if you, but I will also read it with you. It says, "The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended to them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, 'Why do you look so sad today?' 'We both had dreams,' they answered, 'but there's no one to interpret them.' Then Joseph said to them, 'Do interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams.'" So here we have both men who are visibly troubled because of the dreams that they have, because they don't know what they meant. Okay, they're both given kind of really weird dreams. Have you ever had a dream and you just wake up and you're like, what was that? Like, that was crazy. And sometimes they feel a little too real too. If you ask Pastor Sam, one thing about me is I actually get night terrors sometimes. So I'll like wake up screaming. This is not in my script. I just thought I'd mention and expose myself that sometimes I wake up screaming. But he has like a lot of insane stories of me just like thinking people are in the house and then I scream. And so the amount of confusion I have when I wake up from that is like kind of scary. So the fact that they were given dreams by God that were super confusing, obviously they looked a bit troubled, okay? And so what stands out in this situation is Joseph's response. He notices their distress and he chooses to serve them. And instead of dwelling on his own situation and how terrible his life has kind of turned out up until this point and comparing it to them, because remember, they're coming from a situation where they were serving royalty, they were probably taken care of, right? It's like him hearing them complain about their life and he's probably like, oh, well, try being in my shoes, right? Instead of doing that, he asks them, "Why are you troubled?" And when they explain that they've had dreams without interpretation, Joseph immediately points them to God. And he says that the meanings of these dreams belong to God. And this is remarkable to me because Joseph could have easily dismissed the men. He could have easily not wanted to engage in this because of the past. Because the last time that Joseph interpreted a dream, it was a dream of his brothers bowing down to him, and his brothers didn't like that, threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and pretended he was dead, right? So I wouldn't blame him if he wanted to ignore these guys. But rather than turning away, Joseph actually leans in, and he offers to hear their dreams. Faith in God leads us to serving others even when we're in the middle of our struggle. And so Joseph was being used by God in prison to serve these troubled men. And these men had the dreams because God put those dreams in their heads that night. This was not by chance. This was not a coincidence. God was initiating something He was starting something new in Joseph's life, okay? Sorry, that was a really obnoxious cough, eh? The dreams and their meanings came from God. And this was God's message that needed to be known. And Joseph didn't have a book called Interpreting Dreams for Dummies that you could find at Indigo. And he didn't have access to AI like we do, where we could be like, what did my dream mean? And then it'll tell you or something. And he also didn't try to exert his own opinions onto the dream situations, and try to give his own opinion about what they meant. Instead, he had a full reliance on God to reveal the meaning to him. And after explaining the dreams to them, after they explain their dreams to Joseph, Joseph gives them an interpretation. Now, there's two dreams here, okay? The baker's dream points to predicting that he will actually be executed by Pharaoh. Womp womp. Really terrible situation. But we're not going to focus on that one because, obviously we know that's kind of a dead end. That was a terrible joke. Actually, I didn't mean to do that, okay? I actually didn't mean to do that. But fortunately for the cupbearer, okay, his dream meant he was going to be restored to his position by Pharaoh. So this is wonderful news for the cupbearer. If I was the baker, I probably would have rather just not known what my dream meant, But Joseph gives these men the interpretation, but he also asks for a favor from them. So in Genesis 40:14-15, it says, but when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. So just as Joseph interpreted, the baker is executed, and the cupbearer is reinstated by the Pharaoh. However, instead of the cupbearer putting in a good word for Joseph and keeping that promise of that favor that Joseph had asked him, he actually forgets all about him and he moves on with his life. Which is kind of are you kidding me? This dude just really helped you out and now you're going to forget about him? But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that there was a lot going on. He just saw his other coworker just get executed too, right? So there's a lot going on. But now is not only Joseph still in prison, he's also now having to deal with the feelings of being forgotten. I don't know about you, but if you've ever had to go through feelings of thinking you were forgotten or you felt like you've been forgotten, it's not a very fun thing to feel, right? But remember, God did not leave Joseph. Joseph still had been blessed with authority over other prisoners and all those activities. He didn't lose that. And the cupbearer may have forgotten about Joseph, but God did not. And this chapter of Joseph's story might seem like it's really only about how awesome it was that this cupbearer had a dream and he got out of prison, but it's not. This chapter of his story is actually about how God is working in Joseph's favor behind the scenes. And now he has everything in control. And the dreams that God gave these men were confusing for a reason. They made them troubled and distressed them for a reason. There was a purpose in that. And the reason was to point them to Joseph's guidance. And by having their dreams interpreted correctly by Joseph, he's now kind of elevated in their eyes. There was no way that these men, when the interpretations came true, could deny that the God of heaven was for Joseph and was with Joseph. Genesis 41:1-8 says that when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, then out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were going on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled. So he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Which, no kidding, because what does that even mean? This is the kind of dream that would wake me up with my night terrors, right? What does this mean? So Pharaoh has two troubling dreams. Say that 10 times fast, okay? So there's one about 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 thin cows, and then there's another about 7 healthy ears of grain being swallowed up by 7 thin, scorched ears of grain. And no one in Egypt can interpret these dreams for him. He's getting a bunch of people, magicians, all these people, to come in and interpret, and they're like, we have no clue what that means. So then he's talking to the cupbearer, and the cupbearer is like, oh yeah, I actually know a guy. Which, like, about time, because you kind of promised someone that you'd mention him already. So then Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, and I'm going to pause right here for a second, because can you imagine? You're Joseph and you're in prison, and it's been 2 whole years since you've had this conversation with the cupbearer about having a good word for you with Pharaoh. So you've probably kind of given up on the fact that you're ever going to hear anything of that. Like, you're probably kind of given up on the fact that Pharaoh probably ever heard about you. Then all of a sudden, I wouldn't think he got a phone call, because that probably didn't happen, we know that. But somebody came to him and had to tell him, hey, Pharaoh wants to speak with you. Wonder what he would have felt like, if it was almost like a relief or an anxiety. But I can't help but just think, what would that have been like for Joseph? So Joseph is brought before Pharaoh and explains that the dreams mean 7 years of abundance will be followed by 7 years of severe famine. And he advises Pharaoh to appoint a wise administrator to store food during the good years so that they can prepare for the famine. Okay? It's kind of like investing stocks or in crypto or something, but it's going to work out. So Pharaoh is so impressed that he makes Joseph the second in command over all of Egypt, giving him authority to manage the food supply, which, whoa, let's pause for a second, because this is it. Second in command in Egypt. This is the turning point for Joseph. Just a few years ago, he's thrown into a dark prison for something that he didn't even do. And let's not even forget the terrible adversities he had faced years and years prior to that growing up, right? Now, Joseph has been promoted by Pharaoh to be his second in command. Pharaoh says to him in Genesis 41:39, he says, you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. He is second in command in Egypt, and Egypt is a powerful place at the time. This is a picture-perfect, rags-to-riches story. This is Joseph's Cinderella fairy godmother kind of story moment. Joseph's favored by his father. He's loathed by his brothers. He's betrayed by them. Not just betrayed by people he doesn't know, betrayed by his own family. And then he's sold into slavery. They fake his death. He's then falsely accused once his situation gets a little better. Things are looking up. Falsely accused. Thrown into prison for 2 years, and then he's forgotten about. And now, after all of that, now he's ultimately rising to power in Egypt. It's about time. Hasn't this guy been through enough? Joseph is finally getting to live physically in God's faithfulness. Now, don't get me wrong when I say that. Joseph had already been experiencing so much faithfulness from God. God provided for Joseph countless times when his fate could have ended up a lot different, right? He could have not been in Potiphar's household where he was treated really well for 13 years. He could have been killed by his brothers instead, right? It could have turned out a lot differently. But this time, when I talk about faithfulness, it's different. What God had provided for him this time is actually the cherry on top. This is like the icing on the cake, okay? Did it take a long time for him to get into this position? Yeah. Would it be easy for Joseph to be upset with God and kind of question him and be like, okay, you had the power to do this. Why couldn't you do this sooner? Why did you put me all through that, through all of this when, this is the outcome? Why couldn't I just skip the middle part? The pit was one thing the first time. Could we skip the middle here? He probably would have questioned that. And if it was me in this story, it would take me a really long time to be okay with the trials that God allowed me to do or go through, to face, right? Even in my own life, the things that I've been through, sometimes, it's hard for me to look at the things I've been through and be okay with it still. Let alone what's happened to Joseph. But this was the plan for Joseph all along. Everything that he had gone through, everything that had been done to him, this was all a part of God's plan of redemption. And there's been times where I have wanted God to do something so badly in my life that I get so frustrated when it doesn't happen the way I want, when it doesn't happen when I want or how I want it to. And I'm going to assume that you've been there too, because I know every single person in this room is human and has fallen short of the glory of God. And whether you like to admit it or not, I think you probably have desires that you would be disappointed in if they didn't turn out the way that you wanted. And we probably all have things that we desire for God to do in our life. And whether we're okay to admit it or not, we probably also have a desired timeline for those things too. I'm a planner. I like to have things a certain way. And so timeline is a big thing for me. But hear this. God delaying what you want or need is not him denying you. And just because Joseph experienced a long stretch and years of suffering, that does not mean that God had denied him of redemption. Just because God hasn't freed you yet of the addiction that you're experiencing doesn't mean he's denied you of freedom. And just because you've experienced maybe countless years of suffering from mental health issues, that does not mean that God has denied you peace that he's going to give you. And just because you've prayed for years that your kids would get to know Jesus and it just hasn't happened yet, that doesn't mean that God has denied that he's going to make his presence known to them. Okay? What we would consider a delay in our plans is not a denial in God's. And I'm not saying that you're going to get everything that you want in life, right? And I'm not saying that, I want this and snap my fingers and I'm not saying that you're going to get everything you want. But what I'm saying is that God is working behind the scenes in your life and in his perfect time. And we see that just like he did with Joseph, right? So as Joseph predicted, Egypt experiences 7 years of plenty during which he stores up grain. And when the famine arrives, people from all over come to Egypt to buy food, fulfilling Joseph's role as a savior amidst the crisis. Thousands of people are saved because Joseph had this dream that God told him to interpret, and he interprets this dream from God, this message, and he saves thousands of people because of what he did when they had years of plenty and now are in a famine. And the story could end there, really. You see, that sounds like a great story. The end. Joseph had redemption. That's awesome. But it actually comes full circle. The famine spreads to Canaan, where Joseph's family is. And so Jacob, Joseph's father, if you remember him from last week, he sends 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy some grain, because this is what people are doing. Egypt has it all. They have a monopoly on the grain, so he's going to send them there to go get some. And when the brothers arrive in Egypt, Joseph obviously recognizes who they are. I mean, this is the faces of his oppressors, right? They would have looked a little bit older, but how could you not recognize a group of 10 men that look like your brothers, like that literally threw you into a pit, right? But because Joseph had now been assimilated into some royal Egyptian culture, right? He would have looked a lot different. And they didn't recognize him. He was unrecognizable to them. And well, if I'm actually being honest too, they probably would have expected him to be dead by now. Lots of slaves at that time weren't having longevity in their life. They were dying pretty young. And this is probably the last place that they would ever expect to see him. And Joseph sees them. He remembers the dreams God gave him in his youth, that his brothers would bow down before him, right? The dream that ends him up in his situation. But rather than revealing himself immediately, Joseph tests them. He accuses them of being spies, and he demands that they prove their honesty by bringing their younger brother Benjamin back to Egypt. Now, Benjamin is kind of a new character in this story. Benjamin was the youngest brother that Joseph probably would have never met. He kind of comes after Joseph, and he's this new favorite of their father Jacob. And Benjamin stayed back with Jacob because he feared for his safety. So he really, really loves Benjamin, kind of like he really, really had favor and love over Joseph. So we're going to park here for a little bit. Genesis 42, 8-28. This is a big section here, but I'm going to read it and we're going to walk through this together. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." Notice how they mention that? Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And so he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben, who's one of the brothers, replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened their sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brother. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" Okay, that was a lot. They are shaking in their baby seal leather boots, okay? Like, they are so afraid, because to them it looks like they just stole all this grain, right? So, man, okay. So when they arrive, Joseph recognizes them but doesn't reveal his identity to them. Instead, he accuses them of being spies and tests them. He imprisons them for 3 days and then agrees to release them if they bring their youngest brother Benjamin back to Egypt. So he keeps Simeon as a hostage. Poor Simeon. Well, I mean, not really poor Simeon. He kind of deserved it. But, Simeon's a hostage while the others return to Canaan with grain. And I love this part of the story because up until now, we see Joseph as this really faithful, strong servant of God, right? And that is so true, right? But in this moment, we get to kind of see his humanity play out a little bit here. And so Joseph, once rejected by his brothers, now standing over them, holding power over them. He has what they want and he has what they need. This is like an ultimate revenge story, okay? Now, if you were a nerd, I would say I'm a slight nerd. I love Star Wars, and my favorite Star Wars movie is Episode 3, which is Revenge of the Sith. And in this episode, if you're familiar with Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi is standing over Anakin when they're fighting in this battle, and it's all fire, and Anakin's on the ground, and he goes, "I have the high ground now, Anakin," and he's just revenging over him. And this is what I picture, kind of. Obviously it didn't play out this way, but I'm just picturing this one person just having power over the situation. He's in control now. It's the perfect revenge opportunity. It's the perfect recipe. He could make them suffer. He could make them pay for what they did to him. He could throw them into a pit if he wanted to. He could sell them into slavery. He could send them off with Potiphar's wife or something. I don't know. And so a once powerless man is now standing in front of his oppressors with all of the power that he could ever want and all of the resources he could ever need. And society, actually, like when I was practicing this earlier, like 4 times I stuttered when I said the word society, and it happened again, okay? So society, there we go, today would eat this story up. They would make a movie about it. I mean, there is a movie about this story, but like they would make like a crazy secular movie about it, right? They would love it. The world wants us to love revenge. The enemy wants us to seek vengeance and to fall into our human desire for vengeance. The natural flaws in our humanity make us to seek selfish desires because we didn't deserve what was done to us, right? We didn't deserve that. And so it's kind of natural to have that desire for revenge, right? But there's a difference between justice and revenge. Joseph could have done so many things in this situation, and instead of choosing revenge, where him and I are probably a little different, he actually chose grace. Joseph saw his life not as a series of unfortunate events, but he saw his life as a divine plan that was orchestrated by God. And hear this. The resilience that God had instilled into Joseph as he went through trials prepared him to be able to show grace even to his brothers who betrayed him. The resilience that God instilled into Joseph when he went through trials prepared him to show grace even to his brothers who betrayed him. And instead of punishing his brothers, he tests them. He wants to know if they've changed. He wants to know if they're going to do to Benjamin what they did to him. And so on their journey home, the brothers discover that there's money that's been secretly returned into their bags, causing them distress. And when they tell their father Jacob what happened, he refuses to send Benjamin. He's too scared. He can't lose another son. This can't happen again. And as the famine continues, Jacob's family runs out of food, forcing him to send his sons back to Egypt for more grain. And we don't really know how long this period of time was from their visits, but I can't help but think that Simeon's like in custody be like, is my family coming back? I gotta know, right? But they can't return without Benjamin, right? Because that is what Joseph, who they still don't know, is Joseph, has demanded. And Jacob hesitates, fearing that he's gonna lose Benjamin. But the other brother, one of the other brothers, Judah, he steps up and he promises to take full responsibility for his younger brother's safety. And Jacob agrees, reluctantly. There's fear, there's anxiety, but he agrees. And he sends them with gifts and double the money as before, right? Because he wants them to find favor in Egypt. He's just hoping this works out. So upon their arrival, Joseph sees Benjamin again and invites them into their house, and all of them into his house for a meal. And the brothers fear that they're being trapped because the money that was returned in their sacks during the last visit, they're a little spooked. So Joseph's steward reassures them that their money was a gift from God. And when Joseph sees Benjamin, he's deeply moved. And he leaves the room to cry, to weep. He then returns, he shares a meal with them, and he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food than everybody else. He shows favor on Benjamin. And I can't help but think that when Joseph saw Benjamin, who he hadn't yet known, he just saw a reflection of himself in the mirror. He saw the similarities, and everything came flooding back. And everything that led him to that point just came flooding back. The trauma, everything. Joseph, who still hadn't been recognized by his brothers, secretly placed his silver cup in Benjamin's bag as part of a test to gauge his brothers' readiness for reconciliation and to see if they've truly changed. And so by hiding the cup in Benjamin's bag, Joseph creates a scenario that's going to compel his brothers to decide between, protecting themselves like they did before or staying loyal to one another. This is the test. Joseph sends the men on their way, framing Benjamin with the possession of the silver cup. Genesis 44, 3-5 reads, As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my masters drink from and also use for divination? This is a wicked thing that you have done. So they're caught red-handed. They're like deer in headlights, okay? And they're probably pointing at each other when they saw the steward take out the silver bag, like, who took this? And they're like, that like Spider-Man meme where it's like pointing. And they're probably looking at Benjamin like, that was your bag, right? And so as punishment, Joseph says Benjamin will be required to stay as a slave of the ruler, okay? While the rest of his brothers are free to go back to where they came from in Canaan, right? So they return to Joseph. They flame their bodies on the ground. They're begging for his favor. They're begging, saying, we're innocent. We didn't do this. But Joseph says, well, you did, so we have to trade, and I'm going to take Benjamin, and you can go home. Judah steps forward, and he passionately pleads for Benjamin, explaining that if we lost Benjamin, that's going to break our father's heart. He offers himself as a substitute, showing his deep sense of responsibility and that he's changed. He's had a change of heart. This is a night and day difference because the Judah before was perfectly fine handing his brother over. The Judah before was perfectly fine with his brother's fate being in someone else's hands. He didn't care. And overcome with emotion, Joseph sends everyone else out of the room but his brothers, and it's the big reveal. He tells them, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? And his brothers are shocked, and they're afraid. And hear this. Joseph reassures them. After all they've done, after them being in the wrong and them hurting him, they're afraid, and Joseph is reassuring them. He explains that although they sold him into slavery, God used it for good to save many lives during the famine. Genesis 45:14-18, then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. He tells them not to be distressed, and he emphasizes to them that God's plan was at work all along. And then he instructs them to go get Jacob, go get their dad, bring them here, bring their families. At this point, they were well into adulthood. Bring their families, and he'll provide for them. And so when Jacob hears this news, he's in disbelief. And when he sees the gifts and he hears that Joseph's alive, he's filled with joy. He goes to Egypt. The son that he thought was dead for years is not only alive, but he's also second in command in Egypt and has continued to find favor with the Lord. God brought him through. And God is using him to provide for his family now. The story could have stopped right here with Joseph's success as second command in Egypt. He saved thousands of people by following God's message in Pharaoh's dream. It could have ended there. He found success. God pulled him through. Thousands of people were saved. And if the Bible told us all of Joseph's story up until that point in the story, keeping out the stuff with his brother now, it would still be great. It would still teach us about God's faithfulness. It would still teach us that it's the truth of suffering and how when we experience suffering, it's all for a purpose, right? It would still hold to that truth, but it didn't end there. You see, we serve a God of restoration and redemption. And he cares so much about humanity that his desire for us is not only to pull us out of darkness and into light, but it's also to bring us into full reconciliation with him. Joseph's life is a direct testament to how God brings restoration even in human failure, even in our mistakes. And his brother's sin against him, separated him from his family, much like how Adam and Eve in the garden, their sin separated humanity from God. And in Eden, sin broke the unity between God and humanity, but right there and then, that was the start of God beginning a plan of reconciliation. And in Joseph's story, years of separation and pain actually end with forgiveness and restoration of his family. And God's value for harmony and reconciliation with his people has been a major theme throughout Genesis as we've been going through the book of Genesis. And through Joseph's suffering and hardship, God brought him to a place where he could be used to protect the family that God intended to fulfill his promise through. This is bigger than Joseph's immediate circle and his immediate family. It's bigger than that. This is about me and you too. And the covenant that God made with Abraham and the promise of making him a great nation has led to this moment. And God is using Joseph to actually preserve the Israelites. Joseph's rise to power was God's way of preserving the covenant family, ensuring that the line of Abraham continued. And Joseph's life actually foreshadows, which I know Pastor Sam talked a little bit about last week, but Joseph's life actually foreshadows Jesus' redemption. Both beloved sons by their fathers, they were rejected and hated, sold and betrayed, falsely accused. They both suffered. They both were exalted. They saved people and still forgive and forgave those who hurt them. God's redemptive plan for humanity that started in the Garden of Eden, that spared Noah and his family in the flood, that promised a great nation to Abraham through Isaac and Jacob and now Joseph, is pointing us to the divine plan of God sending his son Jesus as a redeemer to the world. And when we go through hardships, we can trust that God's working behind the scenes, using even our pain for his plan. And I know that can sound so annoying when you're going through hardship. And you might be sitting there and you're like, man, this woman needs to shut up. Like, she doesn't get what I'm going through. Like, it can be really hard to hear that. But I just want to let you know that God is working behind the scenes. True redemption involves letting go of bitterness and seeking reconciliation just as God forgives us. And just like Joseph was also able to forgive and show grace to his brothers. God works through our human sin to bring healing. Just like he did in Eden, just like he did through Joseph, and just like he's doing currently with his son, Jesus Christ, and has done. Jesus Christ has conquered it all already. And I believe that all of us can take away something from this today. And maybe you walked into church today feeling like you're in the pit. Maybe you walked into church today needing restoration in your life. There are just relationships in your family that you just need restoration in. Maybe you need reconciliation in your life. I don't know what you're experiencing today, but I do know, and I will hold strong to this truth, that God knows exactly what you are going through. He knows the suffering you are experiencing. Jesus knows the suffering because he experienced it himself. He knows exactly what you're going through. There's hope for you today because God is working everything out for the good of those who love him and for his glory. It may not seem like it. It might not feel like it. You know, it might not be how you want it. It might not be when you want it. But just because there's a delay in what you would have in your plan doesn't mean there's a denial in God's plan, right? But just like God used every aspect of Joseph's suffering to refine and prepare him, he too is working in your life as well. And the redemptive plan that we're talking about here, the redemptive plan that started in the Garden of Eden and continues through this story, it includes us today. And so like I said, I don't know what you're going through. I'd be more than happy to talk about what you're going through, but I don't individually know what everyone's going through. You don't know what I'm going through, But I do know that there's power in prayer, and there's power when we, as a body, come together and just rely and trust in Jesus. And I believe that he truly is doing something in your life behind the scenes. And like I said, it might be obnoxious that some lady is telling you that today. But I promise you that he works all things out for the glory of those who love him and for his glory. And so I want to pray over you today, and then Pastor Jeremy's going to come for some ministry time. But I'm going to pray over you. Sound good? You can't say no. I'm just kidding. Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for today. I thank you that your mercies are new every single day. I thank you that despite suffering, despite just adversity, that you have everything in control, God. In the face of adversity, in the face of suffering, in the face of everything we could go through, God, thank you for always having things in control. Thank you for including us in your redemptive plan. I ask today, God, that all the situations that people are going through in this room today, God, I ask that you would just help guide them through it. Give them direction. Let them know that you are just strongly next to them every single day, day in and day out, God. Let them know that your presence is with them always and that your plan is greater than anything that they could ever dream of, God. Help them to just be able to fully just trust in you today. That when they lay their heads on their pillow tonight, that they have a good rest knowing that you have everything in control. In your name, amen.